And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us here. So like I said before the break, major breakthroughs in these negotiations between the United States and Ukraine there in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration lifting its suspension of military aid and intelligence sharing there with Ukraine. Fox News correspondent Alex Hogan with more from London. Let's watch.
After more than 7 hours of meetings in Saudi Arabia, the U.S. and Ukraine announced new steps to bring the war with Russia closer to an end.
The Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz explained the plan calls for a 30-day pause in fighting, which could then be extended.
The Ukrainian delegation today made something very clear, that they share President Trump's vision for peace.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy tonight says his country is ready to make a deal.
Not only stopping missile, drone, bomb attacks, not only in the Black Sea, but along the entire front line.
It's the first in-person U.S.-Ukraine meeting since President Zelenskyy's dramatic Oval Office visit 2 weeks ago.
You don't have the cards right now.
Now Washington is lifting its suspension of military aid to Ukraine and its pause on intelligence sharing. It comes as Ukraine says Russian forces fired a ballistic missile and more than 120 drones toward the country overnight. Russia says Ukraine launched its biggest drone attack, deploying more than 300 drones, including more than 90 on Moscow. Back on the diplomatic front, Secretary Rubio says the next move is up to Russia.
Our hope is that the Russians will answer yes as quickly as possible. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here.
Trump administration's special envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to travel to Moscow later this week. Also in the talks today, the U.S. and Ukraine agreed to conclude the minerals deal in the near future. In Tel Aviv, Israel, Alex Hogan, Fox News.
Alex, thanks so much. In the meantime here, let's put up this post on social media by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He says today was a good day for peace, thanks to POTUS's leadership and under the gracious hospitality of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We're one step closer to restoring durable peace for Ukraine. The ball is now in Russia's court. Well, let's bring into the conversation someone who has guided us through this story for the last 3+ years. That's national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to see you here. Is that the case now? The ball is in Moscow's court. You and I have talked for weeks now that it doesn't seem like Russia is putting anything on the table, that they haven't even discussed publicly what they are willing to concede here. So when Secretary Rubio says that, should we keep our powder dry here about how Russia will respond to this or not?
Well, Andrew, I think everybody's keeping their powder dry on this one just because there's still a long way to go to get a full agreement with Russia. You got to remember, the Russians haven't even sat down with the Ukrainians yet, although this is a big watershed moment. You know, what came out of this was that the intelligence has been turned back on. The aid is flowing back in, and that's a significant amount of aid. There was about $1 billion worth of aid that was just literally sitting there waiting to go into Ukraine. There's almost about $4 billion behind that that's supposed to go in. Not quite clear what's coming behind that, although I know there's over $50 billion worth of aid that the Congress authorized that's got to come in at some point. So that is huge. That allows Ukraine to start, recharging its batteries, if you will, to, a lot of that's ammunition, weapons that they desperately need. So that's critical. But the thing is, Russia has not been part of this. Now, Steve Witkoff, the presidential envoy, is going to go over to, or supposed to go over to Moscow this week, meet again with President Putin. President Trump is supposed to make a phone call real soon. I'm not quite sure what the timing is on that. Probably before Steve Witkoff goes with Putin directly. So there'll be a lot of pressure to get him to agree. Although within Russia, the internal politics are that some of those hyper-Russian nationalists, if you want to say conservative in a Russian sense, mill bloggers have been saying, why should we have a ceasefire when we're winning? Oh. And I would say at that point, well, the disinformation campaign out of the Kremlin is working pretty good because you got your own mill bloggers believing that you're winning. But it's really a stalemate on the border. So both sides will gain something from this. But that also means both sides will lose something from this as well.
Yeah. So Europe is responding to this, including France. President Macron saying, "I welcome the progress made during the discussions between the United States of America and Ukraine held today in Jeddah, particularly regarding the idea of a possible 30-day ceasefire." You know, I just want to kind of highlight and encapsulate relatively how quick this came together, diplomatically speaking, because the pool notes put out this. The first session between both sides here lasted 3 hours and 20 minutes. They broke for about an hour, and then they came back for a second session for 4 hours and 10 minutes, resolving a lot here. And do you, or are you hopeful now that the relationship between the United States and Ukraine is back on the right track here? Ukraine expressing readiness to accept the proposal to enact an immediate interim 30-day ceasefire. Also, the U.S. immediately lifting the pause on intelligence sharing and resuming security assistance here. So are they on the right track to having better relations in the wake of that very, very tense Oval Office meeting now a week and a half ago?
Andrew, everything that I've seen says yes. Yes, they're on the track. In fact, there was even discussion, I think the White House indicated that President Zelenskyy or President Trump wanted President Zelenskyy to come up and have another meeting in the White House. That was one where, certainly last week or before this meeting, I should say, the optics of that were rather dubious that was going to happen after what had happened in the Oval Office before. So that's a very positive sign. I also should mention that Keir Starmer also came out and was very supportive of this 30-day ceasefire and what was achieved in Saudi Arabia. So you have Macron, you have Starmer, you have France, you have Britain. They met in the White House with President Trump just before that Oval Office meeting that didn't go so well with President Zelenskyy. And they had very positive meetings prior to that. And now they're coming out saying they're very supportive of this. And I think the reason that everything happened so quickly is because, they have not said this, I'm just looking at how fast it moved, everything was kind of front loaded.
Okay.
I don't think anybody walked in that meeting, certainly from the Ukrainian side, that didn't know what the agreement or what the terms were going to be. They'd had a time to talk that over, war game it, if you will, war game it as in discuss it, figure it out if they wanted to do that. And so they knew what their positions were going in, and that enabled the whole thing to move really fast. I mean, literally, it got done in a day. That's pretty impressive.
Oh, yeah. So, Hal, though, are you cautiously optimistic or cautiously pessimistic? I only ask that question because just hours before the talks opened there in Saudi Arabia, Russia shot down over 300 Ukrainian drones. This was the largest aerial assault by Ukraine on Russia since the war began. Russia, I believe now overnight over there, responded in kind here. So with that news and these talks here, does a 30-day interim ceasefire seem far-fetched at that point?
Well, I want to say something about that drone strike. I think the timing of that was interesting. It was, the Russia claims they shot over 300, I think they said like 349 or something drones, which at first was more drones than they had admitted that Ukraine had launched. I found the math on that interesting. It looks, everything I've seen is that Ukraine shot or had over 400 drones in that strike. Not all of them on Moscow, but the bulk of them on Moscow. And the news out of Moscow is that Ukraine in that strike really brought the war home. And I think they did that to really make a big psychological impression on Moscow, on the Kremlin, what the stakes are with this whole thing. So I actually, I found that strike very interesting. Of course, Russia responded and caused a lot of damage. But I think of the two, the Ukrainian strike had a greater psychological effect on Russia than the other strike certainly had on Ukraine. And with that, I would say I am cautiously optimistic at this point.
Okay.
Because I do believe that Putin is looking for some way out. Although Putin is kind of stuck with his own rhetoric. He's kind of had this absolute rhetoric.
Sure.
That they have to achieve their war aims, and we'll see what the internal dynamics are. 30-day ceasefire, peace agreement, that's another big step. And I think there's a lot of work to do before they get to that. To get to that point.